The title of today's story is My Son Was Murdered, but his wife didn't expect I would expose everything. Now let me take you into the darkest chapter of my life. My name is Robert, and for most of my life, I believed that a father's greatest responsibility was to protect his children, no matter how old they became. I never imagined that one day I would be standing in a room filled with questions, secrets, and a pain that no parent should ever experience. My son Daniel was the pride of my life. From the day he was born, I watched him grow from a curious little boy into a kind and hard-working man. He was the type of person who always helped others, even when he had his own struggles. When he married Emily, I believed he had found someone who would stand beside him through every difficult moment. I welcomed her into our family and treated her like my own daughter. But after a few years, I started noticing small changes. Daniel seemed quieter than before, and there were moments when he looked like he was carrying a burden he didn't want to share. Whenever I asked him if something was wrong, he would smile and say that everything was fine. I wanted to believe him, but a father's heart can sometimes sense things that words try to hide. One evening, Daniel called me and asked if he could visit me the next day. His voice sounded different, almost like he wanted to tell me something important, but was afraid. I waited for him, thinking we would finally have an honest conversation. But Daniel never arrived. Instead, I received a phone call that changed my entire world. The news was unbelievable, and for a moment I felt like time had stopped. My son was gone, and I was left trying to understand how such a tragedy could happen. Everyone around me was shocked, including Emily, who appeared heartbroken and devastated. She told everyone that she had lost the love of her life, and that she had no idea how such a terrible thing could happen. At that moment, I wanted to trust her, because I didn't want to believe that someone close to my son could hide anything from me. But as days passed, I began noticing things that didn't feel right. There were unanswered questions, strange reactions, and pieces of information that didn't match the story I was being told. Deep inside, I knew I couldn't ignore those feelings. I had lost my son, but I still had a responsibility to discover the truth. I decided that I would look beyond the words people were saying and find out what really happened to Daniel. I had no idea that my search would reveal secrets that would change everything. I thought I knew about my own family. After Daniel's funeral, my house became quieter than it had ever been. Every corner reminded me of my son. His old chair, the photographs on the wall, and even the small things he had left behind carried memories that I could not let go of. But while I was struggling with my grief, another feeling started growing inside me. The need to understand the truth. I knew that no investigation could bring my son back, but I also knew that he deserved justice and honesty. A few days after the funeral, Emily came to my house. She looked exhausted and said she was still trying to accept what had happened. She cried as she spoke about Daniel, telling me how much she missed him and how unfair life had been. I listened quietly, but something inside me felt uncertain. I remembered Daniel's phone call before his death, and I couldn't forget the fear and hesitation in his voice. There was something he wanted to tell me. I needed to know what it was. I started by looking through some old belongings Daniel had kept at my house. I wasn't searching because I wanted to accuse anyone. I was searching because I wanted answers. While going through a box of his personal things, I found a notebook that Daniel had written in from time to time. Most of the pages contained normal thoughts about work, dreams, and family memories. But near the end, I noticed a few sentences that made my heart stop. Daniel had written that he felt something was wrong, and that he was afraid the people closest to him were not being completely honest. He never mentioned a name, but those words stayed in my mind. The next day, I decided to speak with some of Daniel's friends and co-workers. At first, everyone seemed uncomfortable discussing the situation. They offered sympathy but avoided saying much. However, after a long conversation, one of Daniel's closest friends finally admitted that Daniel had been worried during the weeks before his death. He said Daniel had discovered something that troubled him deeply, but he didn't know exactly what it was. This information only created more questions. I returned home that night feeling more determined than ever. I looked at my son's picture and promised him that I would not stop until I found the truth. I didn't know who was hiding secrets or what I would discover along the way, but I knew one thing. I could not allow my son's story to be forgotten. The truth was out there, and I was ready to find it, no matter how painful it became. The days after I found Daniel's notebook were some of the most difficult days of my life. I carried those words in my mind everywhere I went. I kept asking myself why my son felt afraid, why he couldn't tell me everything directly, and what had happened during those final weeks. I knew I had to be careful. Grief can make people believe things without proof, and I didn't want my pain to turn into unfair judgment. I wanted facts, not assumptions. I wanted the truth, no matter where it led me. I decided to visit Daniel's workplace. I had been there many times before, but this time felt different. I spoke with some of his colleagues and asked them about the changes they had noticed in him. Most of them said Daniel had always been responsible and respectful, but one person mentioned that Daniel had recently become worried about some personal matters. The colleague hesitated before speaking, as if he was afraid of getting involved. Eventually, he told me that Daniel had once mentioned discovering something that made him question the honesty of someone close to him. Those words stayed with me. Someone close to him. That could mean many things, but I could not ignore the possibility that it was connected to what happened. When I returned home, I received a message from Emily asking why I was asking questions about Daniel's life. Her tone seemed different from before. She said she felt hurt that I was looking for answers instead of accepting what had happened. I replied calmly that I was not trying to blame anyone. I was simply a father who needed to understand what happened to his son. After that conversation, I noticed Emily became more distant. She stopped visiting as often and avoided long conversations with me. This only increased my doubts. I remembered how she had always been close to our family, and seeing this change was painful. A few days later, I found another small clue. While organizing some old family documents, I discovered a receipt and a note that Daniel had kept hidden among his papers. The note was not a full explanation, but it showed that Daniel had been trying to collect information about something important. It mentioned a meeting he planned to have with someone shortly before his death. I sat there holding that piece of paper, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. My son had been searching for answers before he was gone, and now I had to continue the journey he started. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, but I also knew that a father's love does not disappear with loss. It becomes a strength that pushes you forward, even when the truth waiting ahead may be painful. The note I found in Daniel's belongings became the center of my thoughts. I read those few lines again and again, hoping that somehow they would reveal the missing pieces of the story. The more I looked at it, the more I realized that Daniel had been carrying a heavy burden alone. As his father, that was the hardest part for me to accept. I kept wondering why he didn't come to me, why he felt he had to handle everything by himself. Maybe he was trying to protect me, or maybe he was afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. I decided to follow the information written in the note. It mentioned a person Daniel planned to meet, a man named Michael who had worked with him for several years. I contacted Michael and asked if he could meet me. At first he seemed nervous and unsure, but after a long silence he agreed.
We met at a quiet cafe where Daniel and I had spent many mornings together. When Michael arrived, I could immediately tell that he had something on his mind. He looked at me and said that he had wanted to speak with me earlier, but he didn't know if it was the right thing to do. I asked him to tell me everything he knew. He took a deep breath and explained that Daniel had discovered some information that made him suspicious about certain things happening around him. Michael told me that Daniel had become concerned after noticing unusual changes in some financial matters connected to his family. Daniel didn't accuse anyone, but he wanted to understand what was happening before making any decisions. He had planned to have a serious conversation and find the truth. Hearing this was painful because I realized my son had been facing something difficult while pretending everything was normal. I thanked Michael for finally speaking with me and asked if he had any proof of what Daniel had discovered. He told me that Daniel had saved some documents and messages because he wanted to be sure before taking any action. That night, I sat alone in my home, looking at pictures of Daniel. I felt anger, sadness, and confusion all at once. But I reminded myself that emotions could not guide my actions. I needed to stay calm and continue searching for the truth. The next morning, I began looking deeper into the information Michael had shared. I knew there were still many unanswered questions, and I knew that every answer could bring a new challenge. But I also knew one thing clearly: Daniel's story was not finished. The truth was still hidden, and I was determined to uncover every secret that had been kept from me. After my conversation with Michael, I knew I was closer to understanding what had happened. But I also realized that the truth was becoming more complicated than I had imagined. I spent the next several days carefully reviewing everything Michael had told me. I did not want to jump to conclusions or accuse anyone without knowing all the facts. My son had always believed in doing what was right, and I wanted to follow the same path. Michael eventually shared the documents Daniel had saved. They were not simple papers. They were records of things Daniel had been quietly investigating. As I looked through them, I noticed that Daniel had been trying to understand certain decisions that affected his family. He had written small notes beside some details, asking questions and searching for explanations. It was clear that he was not trying to hurt anyone. He was simply looking for honesty. One thing bothered me more than anything else. Why had Daniel kept this information hidden from me? Why had he chosen to carry this worry alone? I thought about his personality and remembered how he always tried to solve problems by himself. He was the kind of person who protected others, even when he needed protection himself. While I was going through the documents, I received an unexpected visit from Emily. She looked serious and asked me directly why I was continuing to investigate. I told her that I was not trying to create problems, but I needed answers about my son's final days. For a moment, there was silence between us. Emily said that she felt I was blaming her, but I told her that my questions were not about blame. They were about understanding. I reminded her that Daniel was not just her husband. He was my son, and I had spent my entire life caring for him. I deserved to know the truth about what happened. Her reaction surprised me. Instead of becoming angry, she became quiet. She looked away and said there were things Daniel had never told her either. That statement caught my attention. If Emily did not know everything, then who else was involved? What was Daniel trying to uncover? After she left, I returned to the documents with a different perspective. I began to realize that there might be more people connected to this story than I originally thought. The truth was not only about one person or one secret. It was a much larger puzzle, and every piece mattered. That night, I made a promise to myself and to Daniel's memory. I would not let fear, pressure, or confusion stop me. I would continue searching until I understood what really happened. I had already lost my son, but I refused to lose the truth about his life as well. The more I searched for answers, the more I realized that Daniel had left behind a trail of questions, waiting to be discovered. Every conversation, every document, and every memory seemed to reveal another small piece of a much bigger story. But I also understood that the truth could not be rushed. I had to remain patient and careful, because one wrong assumption could destroy relationships and create more pain. A few days after my conversation with Emily, I received a call from an unexpected person. It was Daniel's old friend, Thomas. He said he had heard that I was trying to understand what happened and that there was something he needed to tell me. We arranged a meeting, and when we sat down together, I could see that he was struggling with his emotions. Thomas told me that shortly before Daniel's death, they had a conversation that he could never forget. Daniel had seemed worried, but tried to hide it behind his usual calm personality. He told Thomas that he had discovered something that could change the way he looked at certain people in his life. However, Daniel wanted to be completely sure before speaking because he didn't want to wrongly accuse anyone. I asked Thomas if Daniel had ever mentioned Emily. He paused for a moment and said that Daniel had not directly blamed his wife. He explained that Daniel's concern was about trust and honesty, and he was trying to understand who he could truly rely on. Those words affected me deeply. I realized that my son was not looking for revenge or conflict. He was searching for the truth while trying to protect the people he cared about. That was the kind of person Daniel had always been. Thomas then gave me something Daniel had asked him to keep safe. It was a small envelope that Daniel had left with him weeks before his death. My hands shook as I opened it because I had no idea what I was about to find. Inside were several pages written by Daniel. They were not accusations, but personal thoughts about the problems he was facing. He wrote about feeling confused, about noticing changes around him, and about wanting to have one final conversation before making any decisions. As I read those words, tears filled my eyes. For the first time, I felt like I was hearing my son's voice again. I could almost imagine him sitting beside me, explaining everything in his own words. But near the end of the pages, I found something that changed everything. Daniel had written about a secret meeting he planned to attend, a meeting that he believed would finally reveal the truth. He had written the date and location, but there was no information about what happened afterward. I looked at that page for a long time. The answer I had been searching for might have been connected to that final meeting. I knew I was getting closer, but I also felt that the next discovery could be the most difficult one yet. I gathered my courage and decided that I would find out what happened on that day, because Daniel deserved to have his story fully heard. The location written on Daniel's page stayed in my mind day and night. I knew that whatever happened at that meeting could hold the answers I had been searching for since the day I lost my son. At the same time, I felt afraid of what I might discover. Sometimes the truth is something we desperately want, but when it finally appears, it can hurt more than we ever expected. The place Daniel had written was an old office building on the edge of town. It was not a place I had visited before, and I wondered why. Daniel had chosen such a quiet location for such an important meeting. I decided to visit during the daytime and ask questions. I wanted to understand what had happened there before making any conclusions. When I arrived, I noticed that the building was almost empty. After speaking with the caretaker, I learned that Daniel had visited there several times before his death. The caretaker remembered him because Daniel always seemed serious and focused. He said Daniel had once asked about another person who frequently came to the building. I asked who that person was, and the answer surprised me. It was someone connected to Daniel's past, someone I never expected to be part of this story. The caretaker could not provide many details, but he remembered that Daniel and this person had several serious conversations. I left the building with even more questions. I felt like every answer opened another door to a new mystery. But for the first time, I also felt that I was finally following the path Daniel had started before he was gone. That evening, I decided to have another conversation with Emily. I wanted to know if she recognized the name I had discovered. When I mentioned it, her expression changed. She became quiet for a moment before asking me where I had heard that name. I told her I was only trying to understand Daniel's final days. Emily looked nervous, but she still insisted that she did not know everything Daniel had been doing. She admitted that during the last few weeks of his life, Daniel had become more private. She said she believed he was dealing with a problem, but never explained what it was. Her words made me realize something important. Maybe the people around Daniel did not have all the answers either. Maybe the truth was hidden deeper than anyone understood. Before leaving, Emily told me something that I never expected. She said Daniel had left a message for her before he died, but she had not been ready to share it. She said she was afraid of what it might reveal. Those words shocked me. A message from Daniel could change everything. I asked her why she had kept it hidden for so long. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she was scared because she thought the message would destroy the family forever. At that moment, I knew the next step would be the hardest one. Daniel had left behind one final message, and I needed to hear it, whatever it contained. I was ready to face it because I had come too far to turn back now. The moment Emily told me about the message Daniel had left behind, I felt a mixture of hope and fear. A part of me wanted to hear my son's final words, but another part of me was afraid that those words would reveal something painful. Still, I knew I could not walk away. I had spent weeks searching for the truth, and now I was standing in front of a door that might finally lead me to the answers. Emily asked me to sit down. She went to another room and returned with a small envelope. She held it tightly in her hands, almost as if she had been carrying its weight since the day Daniel left us. She said Daniel gave it to her shortly before his final day, and told her to open it only if something happened to him, and if the truth needed to be known. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. I looked at Daniel's handwriting on the front, and for a moment, I felt like my son was still with me. I slowly opened it and began reading. Daniel's message was not what I expected. He did not write with anger or hatred. Instead, he wrote about his love for his family, his worries, and his hope that everything could be solved peacefully. He explained that he had discovered information that confused him, and that he was trying to understand the situation before making any decisions. One sentence stood out to me. Daniel wrote that sometimes the people we trust the most can make mistakes, but the truth must be faced with patience and wisdom. Those words showed me that my son was not looking for revenge. He wanted understanding. As I continued reading, I discovered that Daniel had been investigating a matter involving someone from his past. The person he was concerned about was not the person everyone suspected. Daniel had actually been trying to protect someone close to him from a difficult situation. I looked at Emily, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a different expression on her face. She was not hiding anything. She looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy secret. Because she did not know what to do, she finally admitted that she had kept the message because she was afraid. She feared that if people misunderstood Daniel's words, the family would fall apart completely. She said she wanted to wait until she understood everything herself. I told her that keeping secrets only created more pain. Daniel deserved honesty, and everyone who loved him deserved the chance to know the truth. That night, we sat together and started putting the remaining pieces of the puzzle together. For the first time since Daniel's death, Emily and I were working toward the same goal instead of standing on opposite sides. But there was still one important question left unanswered. Who was the person Daniel was investigating? And what was the secret he was trying so hard to uncover before his life was taken away? I knew the final answers were close, but I also knew that discovering them would change our family forever. After reading Daniel's message, I felt like I finally understood a part of my son that I had not seen before. He had been carrying a difficult situation quietly, trying to protect the people he loved while searching for answers. But there was still one mystery left. Who was behind the problem Daniel had been investigating? And why had he felt the need to hide everything? Emily and I decided that we needed to look at every detail again. This time, we were not searching separately. We were searching together because we both wanted the same thing: to understand Daniel's final days and honor his memory. We went through the documents, messages, and notes that Daniel had left behind. While reviewing everything, we discovered a name that appeared several times. It was someone Daniel had known for many years, a person who had once been close to him. The more we learned, the clearer it became that this person had been involved in the situation Daniel was trying to solve. I decided to meet this person and ask directly about what happened. I did not want an argument or accusations. I simply wanted the truth. When we finally met, the person seemed surprised that I knew about Daniel's investigation. At first, they avoided answering my questions, but eventually they admitted that Daniel had discovered something important. They explained that Daniel had misunderstood some parts of the situation, but they also admitted that they had made mistakes and hidden information because they were afraid of the consequences. Hearing that was painful, but it also helped me understand why Daniel had been so concerned. The truth was not as simple as I first imagined. It was not just about one person doing something wrong. It was about choices, mistakes, fear, and people trying to protect themselves without realizing how much damage their silence could cause. I thought about my son and how he had always tried to do the right thing. Even in his final days, he was not searching for revenge. He was searching for honesty and a way to fix what was broken. As we continued talking, we finally discovered the missing connection between the events before Daniel's death and the secrets that had been hidden. The information we found changed the way I looked at everything that had happened. I returned home that evening with a heavy heart, but I also felt a sense of peace. I finally understood that Daniel had not been alone because nobody cared about him. He had been alone because he carried a burden he believed he had to solve himself. There were still painful conversations ahead and difficult truths that needed to be accepted, but I knew we were reaching the end of the mystery. The truth that I had searched for was finally coming together, and now it was time to make sure Daniel's story was remembered the right way. After discovering the truth behind Daniel's final days, I thought the pain would become easier, but I was wrong. Knowing what happened gave me answers. Yet it also forced me to accept that some wounds never completely disappear. A parent can search for the truth for years, but nothing can replace the empty space left behind when a child is gone. Still, I felt a responsibility to make sure Daniel's life was remembered for the person he truly was. Emily and I continued talking about everything we had discovered. For the first time since Daniel's death, there were no hidden feelings between us. We both admitted that fear and confusion had caused people to make choices they regretted. Emily apologized for keeping the message secret, and I could see that she was also struggling with her own pain. She had lost her husband, and she had been carrying a burden that she did not know how to share. I realized that anger alone would never bring peace. Daniel had always been someone who believed in forgiveness. When people were willing to accept their mistakes, remembering that helped me make a decision. I wanted the truth to come out, but I did not want hatred to become the final chapter of Daniel's story. We gathered the remaining information and made sure that everyone involved understood what had happened. Some people admitted their mistakes, while others struggled to accept the consequences of their actions. It was not an easy process, but slowly, the confusion that had surrounded Daniel's death began to clear. One evening, I visited Daniel's favorite place, a small park where he used to go whenever he needed time to think. I sat there quietly and remembered all the moments we shared together. I remembered his childhood, his dreams, and the kind heart that made so many people love him. I realized something important that day. The truth was never only about discovering what happened. It was also about understanding the person Daniel was and keeping his values alive. He had spent his life trying to help others, and I wanted to continue that example. As I looked at the sunset, I felt a strange sense of peace. The journey had been painful, filled with questions and emotions, but it had also taught me something. Sometimes the hardest battles are not fought with strength, but with patience, courage, and the willingness to face reality. I knew my life would never be the same without Daniel, but I also knew that his memory would continue to guide me. The final piece of the story was almost complete, and now I had one last thing to do: make sure Daniel's name was remembered with love, honesty, and respect. Months passed after I discovered the truth about Daniel's final days, but the memories of everything that happened stayed with me forever. Life had changed in a way I never expected. I had started this journey as a grieving father searching for answers, filled with pain, confusion, and countless questions. But by the end, I had learned that the truth is not always about finding someone to blame. Sometimes it is about understanding people, accepting reality, and finding peace after the storm. I continued visiting places that reminded me of Daniel. I looked through old photographs, read his messages, and remembered the moments that showed the kind of person he was. He was not just my son. He was a person who cared deeply about others and always tried to do what was right. That was the memory I wanted everyone to keep. Emily and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. We both understood that we had gone through one of the hardest experiences anyone could face. We talked openly, without secrets or fear. We knew that Daniel would not have wanted his family to remain divided because of sadness and anger. He would have wanted us to move forward with kindness. The people involved in Daniel's story also had to face the results of their choices. Some apologized, some changed, and some had to accept that trust takes a long time to rebuild. I learned that every action has consequences, but people can also learn from their mistakes when they are willing to be honest. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had stopped searching after the first few days. Maybe many questions would have remained unanswered forever, but a father's love gave me the strength to continue. I was not searching because I wanted revenge. I was searching because my son deserved to have his truth known. Daniel's story taught me that silence can create distance, but honesty can bring healing. It taught me that even during the darkest moments, we must hold on to compassion and courage. Today, when I think about my son, I no longer only remember the pain of losing him. I remember his smile, his kindness, and the lessons he left behind. His life was much more than the tragedy that ended it. If there is one thing I want people to understand from my story, it is this: never ignore the people you love. Never be afraid to have honest conversations, and never give up on finding the truth when something feels wrong. Daniel may no longer be beside me, but his memory continues to live in my heart. And as long as I remember him, his story will never truly end. Subscribe over channel and maybe happy, maybe live long.